Our first speaker is Ezra Bond. He will talk about an overview of digital resources for the scholarly study of rabbinic texts. Ezra is an independent scholar whose research interests include the Talmudic era, medieval Kabbalah, Jewish humor, and digital humanities. He has master's degrees in medieval Jewish history from Yeshiva University and spent a year studying the Talmud department in Bar Ilan University. He is a frequent contributor to the foreign blog and has his own blog called Talmud and Tech. I recommend you follow him. It's very, very interesting. I read it now daily. I think that yesterday he didn't write anything, but I'm sure that today he will catch up. So Ezra, please.
Thank you, Al. Welcome everybody. First, I'd like to give an overview of previous guides that exist and what I tried accomplishing with this one. So this guide can now be found on my academia profile. Originally appeared at the Forum blog in 3 parts last year. So I'll start with a short history. I started working on this guide at the beginning of last year, meaning beginning of 2022. I was working on a comprehensive overview of literary forgeries of Jewish literature, so just kind of an overview of that. And I came to realize that a full overview and guide of digital resources available for my research in general in Jewish studies was lacking. So I started compiling this guide. As I said, it was published last year at the Sparm blog in 3 parts and can now be found at my academia profile. I would love if anybody could take a look, download it, share it. I think it could be very useful. Since then, since last year, I've updated it and revised it considerably, and I believe it's fully up to date. No broken links, or very few broken links, and some universities have already linked to it. So I'll start off discussing the scope of my guide, the shortcomings of guides that already exist. This guide is focused on Jewish studies as opposed to general tools for scholarship. So guides to digital resources do exist, but they're often somewhat limited, out of date, and simple lists without an especially helpful logical outline. So here I have an image of a typical university webpage of an Israeli academic Talmud department listing resources with links. I won't mention a specific university, maybe you could guess. But as you can see, it's simply in alphabetical order, the top image, and it isn't really any kind of specific logical order other than alphabetical. And also there's a limited description, but again, it's really just like 1 or 2 sentences and that's about it. Some university departments do it better, but they're still somewhat lacking, and it's very much splintered between, especially in Israeli universities, between different kind of departments, and then in American universities, it's over thousands of years of Jewish history, so it's not. There's definitely room for improvement, and that's where I come in. My focus also, due to the fact that I'm not in an institution and I'm independent, so I did want to focus on more of the open access, something that's high quality, user friendly. There's a lot. Again, the internet is very fast moving, and there is a lot of stuff out there that broken links and not necessarily the best stuff that's out there. I'm sure everyone here is mostly aware of the best stuff to use, but a lot of it is it's not always so well known, so this trying to make it explicit, kind of popularize, let everybody know what exists, what's out there. Okay, in terms of the actual scope, to make this guide more manageable, both because of my background interests and I think also to help people who would be interested. So this is primarily covering resources from post-destruction of the Second Temple, so Bayit Sheni, so around the year 100 CE or so, until the pre-late modern period, so around 1850. So you could call this period a lot of different names: Middle, Rabbinic, Diaspora. Of course, scholars might want to argue and nitpick, but that's kind of the period I focused on. So it's not going to discuss Tanakh, Hebrew Bible, Pseudepigrapha, Philology, or Christianity, all that on one side. And on the opposite end, it doesn't cover all the late modern period, so Hebrew literature, late Hebrew literature, Haskalah, all that. But again, very much focusing on kind of what you could call the Rabbinic period. So now we'll just give kind of an outline of the current ecosystem. And again, in my full guide, it's about 40 pages. I try to really break it down in a full, user-friendly way. So check out there. Here today, I'm only going to cover a few of them to try to just give a taste and help people here who, obviously this is a higher level workshop, so just focus on the more interesting stuff, but there I kind of cover the full ecosystem. So today I'm going to mostly focus on primary text, but just very quickly in this slide, I'm going to give the full outline. So books, Sefaria, Al Torah, Hebrew Wikisource. Everybody knows about Sefaria. Al Torah is going to the next session. Hebrew Wikisource, I'll kind of get to a bit more later, but that's where a lot of kind of the open source transcription happens. Sefaria, Al Torah pulls a lot from there. Scans, we have Hebrew books, and then National Library of Israel's Merchav. We'll go a little bit more into that as well, how the best way is to browse. National Library of Israel has a lot of scans, not so accessible, but go through that. Manuscripts, Ketiv, Hachik, Sinan, of course. Search on the tools, Dicta, indexes. I'll go a little bit into that as well. Secondary literature, which I won't be discussing today, but I have in my guide. Kotar is a lot of really high level, not high level, but high quality academic, a lot of academic publishers. Kindle, there's a lot of stuff. I personally prefer now to do a lot in Kindle. It's very easily accessible, and there is some really good academic stuff out there. JSTOR, Academia.edu, of course, and then you have bibliographic info. So again, National Library's Merchav, Rambi, which is also through Merchav. Encyclopedias, Hebrew Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Judaica. A lot of it is accessible. Hebrew Wikipedia, of course, I have to be careful with, but it's really good for rabbis and communities. A lot of good bibliography cited often. Hebrew Dictionary, also good bibliography. And then I won't be discussing this today at all, but there's a lot of really good popular media out there of varying quality. Academia of Hebrew language is often read by academics, and there's a lot of really good stuff there. Haaretz, Makar Rishon, especially for more kind of contemporary reviews, as well as Hebrew language, a ton of blogs, and then there's another huge ecosystem, YouTube videos, podcasts, Twitter, Facebook. I'm not going to go into that at all today, but especially now, there's more and more of some really good high quality stuff out there. Forums, Otzara Chachma, also very often coming from a bit more of a traditional Haredi point of view, but often high quality discussions. So now to get into specific resources, popular editions. So when I say popular editions, I mean as opposed to the more scholarly scientific editions, which everybody here mostly is more working on, is more interested in, but there is still, of course, a place for the more popular editions. That's kind of what existed mostly for hundreds of years, and often that's the only edition that's available, especially if it's not necessarily something that has a manuscript available, that is just the basic edition. So we have Safari, which I said often pulls from Wikitext. They have their own, and it's again popular from the Dfus. Not necessarily the best, but it's very helpful. So I get Wikisource, scans, as I mentioned, Hebrew books, which of course I'm sure everyone's aware, has OCR, optical character recognition, so it is searchable. They also have something which some people might not be aware of. They actually have a beta search, a search that they have in beta. It's not found on their homepage, but it's kind of similar, closer to the Otzara Chachma experience, where it's a bit more of a more powerful search. It shows all the titles. It's just a lot more user-friendly than the default search. And then, of course, National Library of Israel Marchav. They also, in the last few years, they really upgraded, as I'm sure most people know, that they have really powerful search and filterings and all that. Hundreds of thousands of books and manuscripts. So here I just did a screenshot of one of the tens of thousands of scanned PDFs. This one's a Kedusha Levi, and of course they have their bibliography, which we'll discuss a bit more later. In terms of an index, I just wanted to discuss a bit Halacha Brura. So that's the screenshot of it at the bottom left. Something that people might not be so aware of. This kind of acts, I think, as an index both for Hebrew books as well as for National Library Israel Marchav, as well as some other websites, but mostly Hebrew books, National Library, where they kind of list everything and you can browse it. The meta index, like their own index for their own index, is not great. They kind of have this in a lot of places. These are a lot of links. I created my own meta index, is also available at my academia page. And they've indexed tens of thousands of works in a very user-friendly way, so I think it's definitely worth checking out. Last I checked, last year, they had 36 web pages of indexes, and even just from kind of like a taxonomy perspective, I think it's very interesting. And again, National Library of Israel, unfortunately, they don't have such a great index, and they've changed their technology over the years, over the last, I don't know how many years, 10, 15 years, and so a lot of links are broken. So the best way to get to it, I have a screenshot on the bottom right. They have this thing called Gisha Merachok, and then you filter for a Sefer, and then they'll say Gisha Mukuvenet, and you can find it, and they have tens of thousands of scans available. Some downloaded, some you can download. I think typically you can. They often also will link to Hebrew books and to other Kotar and to other external websites. So they're also just as a way of discovering other sites. It's really good. And then Otzar Chachma, not open access, requires subscription. I'm sure everyone is aware of it. They also have a lot of like really high quality recent publications, including by contemporary Orthodox publishers, also OCR, so fully, basically it's searchable. Obviously OCR is not 100%, but it's very good. Search is good. And we'll go to digital critical editions. So we had the talk yesterday from someone at the Historical Dictionary Project. They have a lot of stuff, not necessarily the most user-friendly. I think it kind of came up yesterday. Of course, that's not really what it's for. It's not meant for browsing. It's meant for very high-quality, accurate edition, but it is possible to kind of get the text from there as well. And then Torah, which we'll have in the next session from Hillel. They're really good for medieval commentaries directly from manuscript, and these are kind of original scientific editions. They have the Rashbam, and they have with his editions like literally dozens of really good editions, and then plus they also have a lot of other stuff which isn't necessarily better or worse than Sefaria. My understanding is that's from the same source. Hillel, I guess, could correct me if I'm wrong. And then Tom Yerushalmi Katz, of course, from Menachem Katz. Then we have the Midrash project from the Schechter Institute. They have many, especially the smaller Midrashim, as well as Midrash Rabbah from Chanan Elmek. On the top right, I have is the synoptic edition of, I think it's Midrash Shmuel. The Rabbah synoptic edition from the Lakupsky, hosted by Bar Ilan University. That's a separate website. Daniel Matt's Aramaic text of the Zohar, which he prepared as part of his monumental translations. That's available online as well at the Stanford University Press website. And then we have Mordechai Bochim, Makbili, Hillel. Also, I think a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of it. They have their own website, markup, the translation, original translation. It's really incredible. They have their paper. They kind of go through it. They have their own dictionary. And so that's a screenshot of Matt's Zohar. It's really just like a PDF you download, but I would say it's pretty clear that's the best essentially edition that's out there in terms of the Aramaic. Let's discuss some manuscripts available online, whether images, scans, or transcriptions. Kettiva, of course, which was discussed a bunch of times. It's a recent project in the last few years, but they already have tens of thousands transcribed. And Gila also, of course, talked about that. Then Garcinan, digital Mishnah project of Dana Stokol. I have a screenshot of that as well. So there's all sorts of different ways that you could present the manuscript, the transcription. So obviously, an incredible project. Team of Schmidman, which came up here already more than once. I have a screenshot of that as well, and as discussed, it's a great example of TEI and just a really good example for how these projects should be done. Ilano project, which I don't think was mentioned yet, but it's kind of a new project that recently been worked on the last few years. It's a new book. I think there's actually an exhibit now at the National Library of Israel. I'm not sure if it's connected directly to Chayes, but it's a really cool example of how it could be done. Like the quality, the resolution is incredible, and there's all sorts of different ways of analyzing it. So that's the bottom left. That's from the Ilano project. Really incredible work. Okay, so now just continuing on just more projects, both at Princeton. So we have the Geniza project, the bottom left, which of course has been around for decades, but it's also really high quality. They have transcriptions, a lot of them directly from Goitain, as well as links to his index cards and published transcriptions, unpublished. And then there's the also Schaeffer. Of course, Schaeffer is famous for his synoptic edition of Michalot, and he has a project for Sefer Hasidim, which is kind of similar, looking at all the different versions, and they're a lot of them are very different. So you're able to present the layout of the text, all transcribed. I believe it's 14 manuscripts. We'll go to search. Of course, this has come up a bunch of times, and I think we'll have a session of this as well, some of the newer tools. Safaria, a lot of people might not know, but their search is also really good, and it's powered by Dicta. So they have their quick map done. Citation finder, at this point, it's really only for Tanakh and Talmud. Maybe they'll have more in the future, opening up of acronyms, which is also really good. You could have a screenshot of that there, and you can kind of play around with it. We can discuss more later. There's Synopsis Builder, which I think Gilon mentioned as well. There's this tool called to remove Mikud, which is not so accessible on their website, but I found it a search, and I personally find it helpful just for simply removing Mikud from Safaria. So here we have an article that I discovered pretty recently from Avi Minman and Moshe Kopel, which I thought was a really good overview, and I also want to kind of give it more exposure in Layer House, where he gives an overview of everything. So their library, which has tremendous potential in terms of improving the readability, parallels, quotations. Again, at this point, really only Tanakh Talmud. Hopefully, we'll get more in the future. And then the analytics, which might be discussed as well, lemmatization, parts of speech tagging, which is also really important for machine learning, natural language processing, and it's incredible for being able to really do kind of the pre-processing and preparing. So there's just some quick screenshots I have over there. That's the library, and that's some of the lemmatization and like the tagging, which is really helpful. Of course, we all know generative artificial intelligence, and it's something that my blog is I've been focused on and testing in the last few months. Punctuation, this is something that Avi and Moshe have mentioned in the article, not yet available in Dicta, but I think this is giving at least GPT-4, which I pay for, I think everybody should pay for. So far my testing has done really incredibly on punctuation. And of course I think we'll see how it all plays out, but I think generative AI and large language models will revolutionize many aspects of scholarship. So you could have automated punctuation, which again was discussed in the article, but as far as I know, not yet available. Key phrase extraction, I found it very helpful for being able to pull out names and sources, like the Talmud Bavli has a lot of formulas, so being able to pull that out. And I think going forward, a specialized LLM, which is something that I'm very interested in, could really revolutionize Rabbinic studies, and GPT-4 really is not at all focused on, like it wasn't trained on rabbinic texts, but I think when and if it is, it could be really revolutionary. So yeah, that's about it. Again, full guide is available on my academia page. I also have a blog about all this stuff. If you're interested, please subscribe, and that's it.
Question?
Many thanks, Ezra. With regard to the last point, localization and Avi, have you done some comparison between the precision you achieved?
Yes, I recently did do that. I have a post about that. So definitely in terms of like Rashi Tevot, Dicta is still better, and of course it gives you all the options, it's much more user friendly. ChatGPT-4 actually did do a pretty good job on opening up acronyms and Rashi Tevot and Kisurim. Again, like everything has to be checked because it'll make just kind of weird mistakes. I think whether for like a beginner who just wants something that's more readable, or even for someone more scholarly who wants to kind of get a first draft, I think it's really good. But I mean, I think it'll just get better from here. But yeah, definitely at this point, I think this Rashi Tevot is still better, and you're able to like choose from a list, and it's definitely, there's no question it's better. But I definitely think that ChatGPT-4 is still helpful. Like there's a place for it.
So you mentioned large language models, right? So the question in my mind is there enough rabbinic material out there to make a large language model?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know necessarily in terms of transcriptions, but definitely with like the OCR that like Hebrew Books has and Otzar Chachma has. I mean, I think there's tens of thousands of texts that I don't see why it shouldn't be possible.
Well, these are derivative texts you're talking about. I mean, if you look at the primary text.
You mean like just like Talmud, Midrash, Mishnah?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it to know like how big the corpus has to be. I would assume it's fine. Like at the end of the day, it is like Talmud Bavli is what, like 1,800,000 words, I think.
16 million characters.
Yeah, I mean it's a nice amount. Plus you've shown me versus
It
Midrash.
pales in comparison to what these things are trying.
No, of course. So like you're not going to get the same size, but I would assume. I mean, I'm sure Avi would know a lot better than I would. I'm just kind of like an outsider, but I would assume that like, something useful could be gotten from like training directly on it.
Yeah, you mentioned extracting index terms and keywords using ChatGPT-4. You didn't show an example for that. Have you done testing?
So I've
in
done,
that
yes,
respect?
that's something that I haven't done a ton of testing on. I would like to do more. I think in general, I'm like very interested in, there's someone, I can't remember his name, someone up at the Bar Ilan, Abraham. So there's someone who's done like work on like more like rigorous logic in the Talmud, and I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that could be done in terms of like really looking at different formulas in the Talmud and really systematizing it. And from what I've seen, ChatGPT is good at that, especially if you give lists. They say like, okay, like pull out all the cases where it says like Tashma and Ibai Dema and all these different things. If you give it a list, then for sure it can do it. But even without that, from what I've seen, also just like pulling out names and saying, okay, pull out all the names and list it. And,
Yeah, but those are all things you can already do algorithmically.
Yeah,
why do
that's
you
true. Yeah, no,
why do
that's
you have
true.
to
That's
reinvent
true.
the wheel? I mean,
But I think there
It's,
are cases where, again, with like the different, and again, like yeah, Victor has worked on kind of like all the tagging and different variants, but I think sometimes you'll have like different variants and things that are missing, and I think a more flexible type of approach could work. And I mean, and also from my perspective, it's really very much kind of like a holistic thing, like bringing to bear all these tools all at once. I think a model is really helpful for like having all the tools at once instead of like a special tool for each one. But yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I think this kind of like machine learning ChatGPT-4 is not necessarily like a complete paradigm shift. It's not going to give us, at least what I'm discussing now, maybe for other things. But and I think Avi and Moshe made this point also in the article that it's really just taking a lot of what's been done with like a lot of hard work over the last 150, 200 years and really turbocharging it and just making it a lot easier to do.
Okay. Thank you, Ezra, for the interesting presentation. Our next speaker is Rav Hillel, Dr.